Our Amplify student ministry, a grade 6 to 12th grade, they do something sometimes in small groups that they call high-low buffalo. Like, okay, what's going on in your life that's your high right now? Something good. What's your low? What's something's really bumming you out or just a sucky thing going on? And a buffalo is just something random. What's a random thing you want to tell us? So I'll quickly tell you my high-low buffalo from the summer. My high was I was invited to go back to our old church where we were at before we came to start Momentum in the Washington, D.C. area. We were there for 8 years. I haven't been back to preach there in probably, I guess, 10 to 12 years. In fact, I was so busy in that season, I really couldn't remember if I even preached when I went back. But, man, I feel fancy right now with the lights. Like, hey. You're lucky I'm keeping the shirt on, okay? Yeah. Speaking of baptized Mike, I'm about to do some magic Mike up here. What is happening? So yeah, we got to go back. I actually couldn't remember if I had preached at my old church last time I was back, but went back there and preached and just saw so many good friends and old friends and, like people that aren't on social media also, where you're like, I don't get to catch up with you and see what's going on in your life. And so, we got up at probably 5:30 in the morning, went and did church, 3 services. Then afterward, just lunch with friends, coffee for hours with friends, just laughing and telling old stories and catching up. And then late night, went to a friend's house, didn't leave there till like 12:15 a.m. And so but it was so good for our souls to see these people and to not have our kids with us. That was also great. But yeah, and then our low was, some of you know through social media, in July we had to put down our dog, Sullivan, who is our only family pet we've ever had. And each one of us loved him dearly, but he had cancer, a tumor inside of his mouth. And we found that out kind of when my summer break started, and we had about a month more with him. And unfortunately, the day we realized we had to put him down was my wife's birthday. And so we were like, okay, it'll happen tomorrow, but that was all that was on our minds for her birthday. So one of the saddest days of my life, an epic low for sure. And then my buffalo is I have a new song coming out on Friday because I got some time off and chilling. I just got to hang and write. But I have a new song coming out Friday called Shooters. It'll be on Spotify, Apple Music, YouTube, all that stuff. I make pennies off people listening, so it's not like I'm up here like, hey, you listen to my song, we'll buy new lights for the auditorium. That's not how it's going to work. But I do love knowing that people are listening, so let me know what you think. Even a couple, Ron's going to love it, the guy that was grumpy up here. He's a big hip-hop fan and usually just cheeses when a beat comes on. He's like, dang, who produced this? You know what I'm saying? Give me a merry-go-round. I'm about to bounce with this. But yeah, I had a 5-week preaching break. I think people sometimes think I just did a break the whole time. No. I had a 5-week preaching break. The first 3 weeks I worked really hard. Then the last 2 weeks we got vacation and got our first family vacation in a couple years, which was really, really awesome. But I do want to thank our summer preachers, Russ Goodwin, Tim Jones, Paul Sheneman, Zion Daniel Smith, and Jeremy Speth did such an incredible job this summer. For sure. I really feel like they took it to another level with their research and their preparation and delivery. I just thought they did an excellent job. We are super blessed to have the teaching team that we have with the different perspectives and all that. So thank you guys so much for letting me take a break. Not that you had a say in it. But if you want to go to Mark chapter 8, there's a paperback Bible underneath the chair in front of you. You can turn to Mark chapter 8 in there, or there's a free Bible app you can download. Go to Mark 8. So we've been working our way through the Gospel of Mark in Scriptures on and off for the last 2.5 years. But we'll do a few weeks, we'll take a break, do something else, and we go back and forth. It's about discovering the real Jesus in the Gospel of Mark, which is the oldest gospel. And it's not the Jesus that we want to fabricate or make up for 2025, whatever fits now. It's the real Jesus, who he really is, what he said, what he did. So this week is very big picture. I'm not saying it's bad or boring, but it's big picture. It's very Christological, meaning this is really a study of the person of Jesus or the person of Christ and what he did and who he is and all that stuff. And so the next 3 weeks, I cannot say enough. The next 3 passages we're going to get into are super cool, and they do have daily practical implications for your life for sure. But this is a very big picture because we're at a major transition in the Gospel of Mark. Then after this series, which is a total of 4 weeks, we're going to kick off Mo Groups for the school year, and then we're going to be in the Momentum at the Movies 2025 series, so it's getting real. It's moving. So in the Gospel of Mark, chapters 1 through 8, the question, if you missed it all or some of it, the question through the whole first 8 chapters of this gospel has been, who in the world is Jesus? Who is this man that even the wind and the waves obey him? Like, it just comes up in so many ways. Who is this? So that's the question. Who is Jesus? Now, we're at near the end of chapter 8. We're right at the halfway point. And Peter, the spokesperson of the main 12 disciples, he says to Jesus, you are the Messiah. It's like, boom, this is a big moment. They haven't gotten this through the first 8 chapters. They're not getting who he is and what his mission is. So he says, you are the Messiah. So the real Jesus is God in the flesh. He's the Christ, and same word in a different language, Messiah, Christ and Messiah. And that's a figure that's been prophesied for centuries before into the part of the Bible that we call the Old Testament. So Messiah means anointed one. And that basically anointing is something you would do to, for instance, a king. And this is a way of saying, Jesus, you are the king. You are the true king. Like, you're the king who will put everything right in some kind of way. You are the king to end all kings. You, Jesus, are the Messiah. And so if you've been following along through this, you're like, oh, finally, the disciples, because Peter's really a spokesperson for the 12 in this situation, finally they get it. Well, kind of, okay? They're starting to get it, but this is a major milestone. You're the Messiah. Well, that's got to be good, right? It is, but there's more for them to learn. So it's funny in Jesus in verse 30, it says, right after that, you're the Messiah. Jesus then warned them not to tell anyone about him. Okay? You are the Messiah. Then boom, the next verse, Jesus warned them not to tell anyone about him. So he's like, okay, I'm the Messiah. Now let's shh about that. Now that's something we call, and it's happened throughout the book many times, Jesus would heal somebody and say, hey, let's keep that quiet. Why? I'll explain why. It is called the messianic secret. Like, let's keep the identity of Jesus, that he's the Messiah, secret. Why? It happens over and over and over again. Here's why. Historically, I don't know if you've ever heard, but Jews have been persecuted. Has that ever come up? Yeah. So this is the first century, and that's already happened a ton. It didn't take Hitler. It's been happening forever. So up to this point, when Jesus appears on the scene, they have been oppressed by the Assyrians, the Babylonians, the Persians, the Greeks, and now, in Jesus' time, the Romans. So the scriptures described and prophesied that one day there would be kind of a hero to show up, and he would help and he would save and deliver God's chosen people at that time, the Jews. He would deliver them in some kind of way. But after those prophecies about the Messiah are in Scripture, Jewish writers started writing and adding a whole bunch to that picture. Here is what we think that Messiah is going to look like. And frankly, I've read several passages from non-biblical Jewish writers, and dude, it is crazy what they think the Messiah is going to be like. He's going to be this destructive conqueror in history that will appear, smashing his enemies into utter extinction, just crushing them. And it's brutal. Like the Messiah that they expected he'd be violent, he would be nationalistic, he would be destructive, vengeful, military conqueror. It would end with the perfect reign of God, but it came through a bloodbath. I mean, an absolute bloodbath. This is what the Jews were expecting mostly. And the fate of the Gentiles, most of us probably, non-Jews, man, that would be utter destruction. And Israel, they would rejoice to see their enemies broken and in hell at the end of all of it. Like, this is what they're longing for. Messiah, come do this for us. So it's grim in these non-biblical writings. But here's the point, is the Messiah was often assumed to be this great superhuman figure Like he would show up and he'd crash into history. He would remake the world, and in the end, he would vindicate the Jews. Now, this is what I think is kind of helpful for us in 2025. I want you to picture what they're expecting is Steve Rogers' version of Captain America, okay? But for them, because the Steve Rogers version, he had a serum that made him superhuman. And so they're expecting Jesus to show up and be Captain Israel. I mean, he's going to show up and he's going to have a shield, and it's going to have the Star of David on it. And he's just going to start wrecking faces, man. And they're like, man, he is going to lead us, and it's going to be super nationalistic. So a nationalistic superhero, this does remind me, by the way, Andre, our worship leader up here. At one time, we put him in some tights and sent him downtown, some superhero tights, and he had a maple leaf on his chest, and he was Captain Canada. You can look it up on YouTube. It is classic. He owned the role, leaned right into it, and he was Captain Canada. There he is standing in the back, flexing his chest right now. But that's what people expected, like Andre to show up looking so fine in tights. But this is Captain Israel, okay? And so this is what they picture. And no doubt, that's what the Jews of that time expected. And no doubt, the 12 disciples weren't any better. That's exactly what they're picturing the Messiah will be. So they say, Jesus, we know who you are. You're freaking Captain Israel. You're the Messiah. That's what they're picturing. And he says, you know what? You probably ought not talk about that. Can you understand why? Because they're going to be like, he's the Messiah. He's the Messiah. Everybody get a sword. He's the Messiah. In fact, do we have any guns yet? It's only the first century. No, we don't have guns? Okay, we'll just get whatever you got. So they're ready to go, okay? That's what they're picturing. They have a defective view of the Messiah, and so they want a political uprising. All the Jews want a political uprising with the Romans. And so in this pivotal, crucial moment in the Gospel of Mark, this is what happens next. Verse 31. Jesus then began to teach them that the Son of Man must suffer many things and be rejected by the elders, the chief priests, and the teachers of the law. Those are all the power brokers of the Jewish nation right there. And he must be killed, and after 3 days rise again. Verse 32, he spoke plainly about this because everything before this had been pretty metaphorical, parabolic. And so now he's speaking plainly about it. And Peter took him aside and began to rebuke him. Now, rebuke is a really strong word. It means to sternly caution, to sternly advise or admonish someone. I recommend not doing that with Jesus, by the way. But Peter pulls him aside. He's like, no, this won't happen. And so in verse 33, but when Jesus turned and looked at his disciples, he rebuked Peter. Get behind me, Satan, he said. You do not have in mind the concerns of God, but merely human concerns. So, pivotal point, the first 8 chapters, who is Jesus? Now, starting here, the rest of the book, the Gospel of Mark, is all revolving around the question, what kind of Messiah is Jesus? Okay, Jesus is the Messiah. What kind of Messiah is he? He's not Captain Israel. He's telling us he's going to what? Well, so this is interesting to point out here. We're going to look at that verse 31 for a minute. It says, the Son of Man. Well, that was Jesus' most popular term, his favorite term to use for himself. Most of us would hear that and be like, duh, you're a son of man. You're a human, okay? That's what a son of man is. Well, there's more implications. If you were reading along with us this summer, we had a same-page challenge where we read Daniel in the Old Testament. And it contains a prophecy in Daniel 7, which if you read it, this is what it's referring to. Whenever Jesus calls himself the Son of Man, or Mark calls him the Son of Man, it's talking about, in Daniel 7, this divine figure, this messianic figure that it's prophesying who will come with the heavenly hosts, the angels, and he will set everything right. And Jesus is constantly identifying himself with that prophecy in Daniel 7. The Son of Man came to do this. The Son of Man came to do this. It's a messianic figure and prophecy about the Messiah. In fact, in verse 38 of Mark 8, Jesus had the audacity to say, someday I will return to earth in my Father's glory with the holy angels. What? He's saying, I'm the dude prophesied about in Daniel 7. But then, notice he says, the Son of Man, Mark says, the Son of Man must suffer and he must be killed. This is the first time in human history these two concepts have been put together. Jesus is the first to do it. No one had ever in Israel's history put these two concepts together. Suffering, Messiah. No one. And so he says, I'm going to be a Messiah who's going to suffer. And so, there are places in the Old Testament, the Hebrew Scriptures, all the stuff leading up to Jesus being born in Bethlehem. Isaiah 52, 53, we did a series in that a couple years ago called the Servant Songs. There's this mysterious figure prophesied who's going to suffer, and, he's going to suffer badly. And so there are these servant songs, but no one before Jesus had ever taken those suffering servant prophecies and said, this dude is the same dude as the Messiah, okay? The Messiah is going to come and set everything right. He's going to be a king. And then there's a suffering servant. We don't really know what to do with that mysterious figure. Jesus is like, I'm both of them. Both of these things are about me. And so all the Jews at that time and the disciples are like, how could a divine figure like the Messiah suffer? How could that happen? You're going to be the king that puts an end to all other kings. The Messiah is supposed to make everything right. How do you make things right by being killed? That's the question. Like, that couldn't possibly happen. So Jesus was the expected Messiah, but in the most unexpected way. They wanted Captain Israel. This is not what they're expecting. So he came to be a suffering Messiah. That's the real Jesus. He's like, I am a king, but I'm a king on a cross. And you're going to have to see how this plays out to understand why this is what has to happen. So then there's one more thing in this passage that I think is interesting. Mark says this in verse 31, the Son of Man must suffer, and he must be killed. This isn't just preacher exaggeration, but that word must right there is probably one of the most significant words in the entire Bible. The idea, it's used twice here. Jesus didn't just say, I've come to die. He says, I have to die. Why? What's going on? He says, I must suffer. It's divine necessity that I suffer. I have to lay down my life. And so the world couldn't be changed. The world couldn't be renewed. The world couldn't be saved. And your life couldn't be transformed if Jesus didn't die. He said, I must suffer and I must die. Now, about 5 years ago, I broke this down, but it's something I think needs to be repeated more often than every 5 years. But the cross and the resurrection, the suffering and the resurrection that Jesus talks about here, that he starts to speak plainly about, it is central to human history. It is the climax of all of human history. It is so central. Later on, a guy named Paul would say, this is of first importance. This is the number one thing, the gospel, that Jesus would suffer, die, be buried, and raised. And so, if you picture it like this, everything in the Old Testament of the Bible, like from the beginning in creation, all the way up to Jesus being born in Bethlehem, the Old Testament, all of this is pointing ahead toward the cross and the resurrection. Everything in it. It's so cool when you look through it. It's like there's prophecies, there's predictions, there's promises, there's this foreshadowing, there's this nerd thing called typology, which are sometimes even objects that represent what Jesus will be one day, but you don't get all of it until the cross and the resurrection happen, and then you're like, oh, all of that stuff has been pointing to this moment. Like, he must suffer and die. This has to happen. This is the climax of history. For the nerds in the room, and apologize if you're not a nerd, but we might win you over. If you were a part of watching the MCU, when Iron Man was the first movie for the MCU, really, in the canon, how many of you are MCU nerds in any kind of way? This will just give me confidence to continue. Okay, 7. So there's 7 in here. So the rest of you just take a short nap, and then I'll yell real quick. Okay, we got 8. We got a tech room guy. So in the MCU, it's kind of nuts because the MCU is all this one big story that was, it was called the Infinity Saga. We're not in that anymore. It was the first part of the story. And it was so much setting up, building up, pointing ahead to an epic showdown that once it got to that point, even people that hadn't seen all the movies were like, I want to go see Endgame. I want to go know this is crazy. The Avengers have come together to deal with something. Okay, I want to go see that. So the Infinity Saga, phases 1, 2, and 3, it went on from 2008 to 2019. It was over a decade, more than 20 films, all at least 7 hours in length, that just went on and pointing ahead, until it came to that moment of the Avengers versus Thanos. There we go. There's my 7. Okay, I can depend on my 7. And so it was huge. This epic drama that just kept pointing ahead to this. Like, whoa! It took the beginning of Iron Man and Tony Stark and all that happened with him to get to this point, including Black Panther and all these other things along the way. The drama of the coming Messiah is infinitely more epic than that. It's all of human history. Ever since Genesis 3, when people first rebel against God, there's immediately a prophecy about the Messiah. This is what's going to happen now, so that God can deal with the fact that he created you and you gave him the finger. Every one of you gave him the finger. I gave him the finger. You created me, and we were like, I know best. So Genesis 3 is like, this has to be dealt with. It has to be dealt with in some way. And then there's prophecy, prediction, promise, typology, foreshadowing, all to get to this point of this epic battle that we're going to face Thanos. We're going to face death itself, and it's going to happen through the cross. And then you go on to, after that happens, because it's so central, everything after that in the New Testament, and even today in Christianity, in the history of Christianity, everything is constantly pointing back to the significance of what Jesus is saying. I must suffer, I must die, I must rise in 3 days. Now everything after that is pointing back to that. For instance, every Sunday at Momentum, I know not all churches do this, we take something called communion. My voice is like, you haven't spoken in 5 weeks. What are you doing talking so much right now? So we take communion, and it's bread that represents Jesus' body broken on the cross for us, and juice or wine that represents his blood poured out for us. And every time we take that at Momentum, we are pointing back saying, look how significant that was. That he had to suffer, he had to die for us, and he was raised from the dead. Or you go to something like the fact that you're here this morning. The fact that we meet on Sunday is pointing back to the significance right here. Man, like the Jews, their day of rest and worship was Friday sundown to Saturday sundown. Everything changed when Jesus rose from the dead on what? A Sunday. Then Christians, Jewish Christians, started saying, well, that's the day we're going to meet to worship. And so the reason you're here is because it's us pointing back to, this is so significant. When you decide to follow Jesus and put your faith in him, we crack this thing off the top, and it gets real humid in the room, and there's hot tub time machine is under here. And so we dunk you in water as a picture of death and surrender, but that all is pointing back to this right here. When you're baptized, the first thing you do is reenact the gospel, the good news story of Jesus. You die and are buried, you die to self, and then you rise to walk a new life, which is what Jesus did. He died and was buried and rose to walk. There's no coincidence there. It's pointing back to the gospel. It goes on and on and on, that when we worship, we're pointing back to say, this is central. This is the most important thing. Jesus was a great example. He did not come to be a good example, though. Even though he was perfect and he was a great example, he came because he said, I must suffer, I must die, I must be raised. When you drive down the interstate, another thing that points back to this is, what restaurants are at this exit? Chick-fil-A, but it's closed on Sunday. That points back to this. Why? Because Christians founded it. And we're like, we're not going to be open on Sunday. That's the day Jesus rose from the dead. We're going to worship, let people have that day off. I can't have Jesus chicken because this is so central to our lives. And I'm going to travel today and I'm going to be like, oh, maybe for dinner, I'm going to go get some chicken. Oh, nope. Just like Kanye West said, it's closed on Sunday. So this is reference 2 of you got. And you weren't white, okay? So this is central. This is at the epic center of everything. It is so, so important because Jesus said, I must suffer. I must die. And he was the one who, said this has to happen. Some time ago, there were somebody on stage. I think it was my wife, Shannon. Somebody on stage challenged Momentum to get to know each other more on Sunday morning than just kind of wave and hide each other. Like, hey, what's up, peace? Like, lean into relationships, get into community, get into a Mo group. And so there's a woman at Momentum whose name's Jen Gordon, and she said, I took that seriously, and I started kind of shooting the bull with a couple of friends. And she made friends with people that she used to just walk past on Sunday mornings, Mary Beth and Danielle. And they become buddies. They sit together. They distract me during my sermon. They run their mouths. They do stuff outside of church and all that. But they decided their friendship had blossomed so much that they wanted to get matching tattoos together. And so, yeah, I know. Ooh. And they had already said, each of them separately, that they wanted to get sunflower tattoos. They're like, what, you did too? Yeah, I did too. Okay, let's all get a sunflower tattoo together, which has always been my dream too. And I'm like, dang it, I got left out. And so, but they also combined their favorite color, each of their favorite color, and they made that a part of the design. And they put Yahweh in it, which is the revealed name that God gives us for himself in Exodus chapter 3. And if you zoom in real close, one of the things that they put is an arrow and an arrow pointing to a cross. And it was just their way of just saying, we need Jesus to be the center of our lives, Jesus to be the center of our friendship. Jesus is central. The cross, the resurrection is central to who we are and to our lives. Now, if you go back to the previous slide for 1 second, a couple things we can learn from this is, one, only one of these women have been outside all summer. That's the first thing. That's the first thing we're going to learn. So maybe they can hang out like, somewhere at Momentum on the pavilion patio over here. So that's the first thing. Secondly, they got tattoos based on my preaching content. These are godly freaking women, okay? You should take notes and you should find ways to permanently ink things that I say that are Jesus-centered. A few months ago, I talked a sermon about testimonies. That's something you should go back and find, and you should tattoo that. But the cross and those arrows just remind them Jesus is central. Like, it gives new meaning to my entire life once I understand what Jesus is saying here. Now, when Jesus announced this, that he's a suffering Messiah, to the disciples, it stunned the disciples, and that leads us into how it ends. They're stunned. And so, in fact, author Warren Wiersbe, he talks about how when Peter spoke, said, you're the Messiah, that's confession. That section he calls confession. Then he said, this next section is now confusion. Like, wait a minute, you're a suffering Messiah? You're not Captain Israel? And so, verse 32, he spoke plainly about this, and Peter took him aside and began to rebuke him. Now, again, that's a really strong word. It means to sternly caution. That's the word that's used when Jesus cast demons out of people. He rebuked demons. So Peter is rebuking Jesus, ill-advised. And so he reprimands Jesus because he thinks Jesus should be Captain Israel. And then the Gospel of Matthew gives us a little bit more. In what way did he rebuke Jesus? Well, it says this in Matthew 16:22. Peter took him aside and began to rebuke him. Never, Lord, he said, very key, this shall never happen to you. What is he saying? He's saying, you will not go to the cross. Oh. He just said, I must. It is a divine appointment. I must suffer. I must go to the cross. You will never. There's bravado here. I'm the leader of your bodyguard. This will never happen to you. You're going to be Captain Israel. There's no way for you to redeem us. If you're dead and suffering, there's not on my watch. And so then Jesus turned and he looked at his disciples. Notice that. And he rebuked Peter. Get behind me, Satan. He said, you do not have in mind the concerns of God, but merely human concerns. I call this section, Jesus is rude to the first Catholic Pope. A couple of you got that. Catholics believe that Peter was the first Pope. So it's likely that Peter rebukes Jesus as a representative of the whole 12. The way that he confessed Jesus is the Messiah, you're the Messiah. Yeah, we've been talking about it. You're the Messiah. And then when Jesus is like, okay, but here's the kind of Messiah I am, Peter's like, no, heck no, man. You'll never go to the cross. So Jesus looks at the disciples. Usually confrontation, Jesus says, is like something you pull someone aside to do. This is confrontation with all 12 of them. He looks at the disciples and he rebukes Peter and he says, get behind me, Satan. Why? You're trying to stop me from going to the cross? I didn't come to be a perfect example. I didn't come just to heal blind people. This is the main reason I've come. I must suffer. I must die. This is God's central plan for the history of the world ever since everyone rebelled against God. I'm a king, but I'm the kind of king that goes to a cross. The real Jesus must suffer. You know, I look back at that graphic of the arrows and the gospel, if you go back to that one more time. I was thinking about this week, and I was like, this is also a way to describe my life. And if you follow Jesus, this is a way to describe your life. Meaning, there was a time where I came in contact with understanding the cross and the resurrection of Jesus and how that spoke into and informed my entire life. And I looked back then at that point, and I started seeing all the things that pointed forward to this moment when I would come to bow the knee to Jesus and understand that he had nothing but good for me. And I was like, man, that algebra teacher, when I was a freshman in high school, he was trying to share his faith with me. Man, when we went to that Tigers game, when I lived in Toledo, my family went, and I got an autograph from Frank Tanana, a pitcher at that time. And as he autographed my baseball, underneath it he wrote John 14:6. And me and my lost family, all of us, went back, and they were like, hey, go to your room. You got a Bible, don't you? I was like, yeah, my grandpa gave me one. I went up to my room. We all gathered around in my room, and I looked up John. Where in the world is John? Here's a 1 John, a 2 John, a 3. No, that's not okay, John. And I found John 14:6. And I read out loud with the baseball in hand to my stepdad, my mom, and my little brother. Jesus said, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father but through me. Cricket. Cricket. All right, well, thanks, Frank. I just put it away. It was the weirdest moment for me, lost kid, and my lost family. But I look back and I'm like, Jesus just kept sending people, man. He kept sending people hoping that one day I would get it and bow the knee and be like, I know who Jesus is. And I know the kind of Messiah he is. He's the kind of Messiah that loved me so much he would die for me. And all of that gave new meaning. Everything leading up to this moment was like, I can see how God was trying to get a hold of me. He's pursuing me. He wasn't giving up on me, but he wanted me to submit, and he was leaving it to me to do it. And then after that, it's like now I look back and everything in my life, my value, my significance, my goals, my mission, everything points back to the cross and the resurrection. I could make my mission in life this, but it's not. It's this. I could make my identity based on this or whatever else, but it's not. It's based on this. And everything else in my life moving forward, I'm always looking back at the significance of this. And that's exactly what those ladies were doing with those tattoos. They're saying, this is central, this is so significant, and it is central to my life. Everything. It's the why. Why? Because I needed forgiveness, but God was like, I don't want you to pay the penalty that you deserve for rebelling against the Creator that gave you life. I love you so much that I'm going to pay the price for you. And I'll tell you this, the only thing that will really ultimately ever change your life is love. Anything else might change it temporarily, might change. The only thing that will permanently change your life is love. True love. Sacrificial love. Like, I didn't do this for me, I did this for you. I totally sacrificially laid down my life for you. And so the cross and the resurrection are central to my life, and that's a picture of my life, coming in contact with the cross. Close with this. C.S. Lewis is my favorite nonfiction author. He was an Oxford Don who was an agnostic, but eventually became a Christian, and his pen has led millions to Christ. He's unbelievable, was an unbelievable thinker and writer, and I especially appreciate his nonfiction stuff. But there was one non-Christian dude who had a huge impact in his life that kind of pointed him to Jesus, and it was a non-Christian guy, an agnostic, a really cynical unbeliever. And in fact, one biographer wrote of this guy, his name was T.D. Weldon. One biographer wrote of him, he scoffed at all creeds and almost all positive assertions. He's just cynical. And so one day, Weldon, though, made a comment to C.S. Lewis. I couldn't find it. I couldn't find the comment. But the context, I always pictured being at a party over getting hors d'oeuvres and snacks from a table. And I might be wrong about that. But that's where I pictured it happening. And they're walking together, they're talking. And T.D. Weldon had just been studying a Christian theologian's defense of the Gospels, like Mark, Matthew, Luke, and John. He'd been studying what Christians say about Jesus. And he made this offhand, casual comment to C.S. Lewis, who was also an agnostic. And he said, rum thing, that stuff of a dying God, it almost looks like it really happened. Now, first off, only a Brit can start a sentence by saying, rum thing. Like, I'm going to start saying that, just pulling that out, like, rum thing. I did a top 10 list and no one laughed at it, you know. So, rum thing. But that's how he begins. And just like offhand, he mentions the C.S. Lewis, rum thing, the dying God, that stuff of the dying God. It almost looks as if it really happened. And that got C.S. Lewis thinking. First, honestly, C.S. Lewis said, when he first said that, I thought he was drunk. Like, what is he? This guy's the most cynical of all people. And then when he realized he wasn't, it got him thinking and the wheels turning so much that he was like, I have to study more and understand the Gospels. Here's the deal. No thinking person with integrity questions whether there was a historic person named Jesus of Nazareth who died on a cross. You're absolutely being irrational if you don't think that happened. The question is, but was he God in the flesh? Okay? He'd certainly died on a cross. Was he a dying God? And that's what Jesus says. He says, I am the Messiah. I am God in the flesh. And here's why I have come. I have come to suffer, and I must die. That is the central point. And now we're going to see as the disciples try to grasp that and understand that, we're going to constantly see the implications now of them trying to understand what kind of Messiah Jesus is. Let's pray.